I know you want to buy this, but let me tell you 10 more things first.
Welcome back to another amazing episode of the Perfect RA podcast. We are super excited to be with you today. Again, I'm your co-founder, Micah Shalansky, and with me, as usual, the legendary Matthew Jarvis. What's going on, Jarvis?
Micah, I'm always excited to do these episodes. And
So
it's
stoked.
amazing. We get to tens of thousands of downloads a month. And thank you to all of the members of the TPR Nation. But I got to say, Micah, even if it was just you and I doing these, which is probably how it was at the beginning, I have just so much fun. It's so much fun to dive deep into our practices. Where can you and I improve? Where can other advisors that are trying to deliver massive value, where can they improve? So I'm always fired up to do these.
Jarvis, they are so exciting. And I think one of the things, as you just said, is these are things that we get to take back to our practice and improve, right? So if nobody listened, and we're glad you do, but if nobody listened, right, we could still make improvements. Now, I think that's a solid point for what we're going to be talking about today. And in fact, before we get too much into today's episode, I really got to trust everybody, check your ego. As we're doing more advisor coaching, we're talking to more advisors out there. It's so easy. And I'll put myself, I'm super guilty in this, right? I don't like to be wrong. I like to be right. And my ego gets in the way. And when someone starts to give me some criticism, right, and really trying to help me build and become better, I start being really defensive, being like, I already do that, I already know this, I already do this. Okay, well, great. The reason they're saying it is because people don't know this and people aren't getting this. So I need to stop right there. I need to check my ego at the door and say, great, how do I get better? Because this isn't about you being right or wrong. This is about delivering massive value to your prospects, to your clients, etc. And Jarvis, I don't know about you, but I think this is really where it goes wrong is we get in our own way providing help to clients.
Complete. Now, Mike, I would add just one small caveat there, and I'm 100% on board with you. My only caveat would be I am more reserved about taking advice from people whose practices are much smaller than mine,
Yes,
or
yes.
whatever area we're talking about, right? If the guy running the ski lift chair is giving me snowboarding advice, and I can tell he's never snowboarded, I don't really want that guy's advice. But anybody in any field who is doing just anything narrowly better than me, that's who I want to listen to, right? How did you do this so well? How did you build a practice like this? How do you effortlessly close prospects? How do you deliver massive value to clients? And so, Michael, when you give me feedback, when Tom Gow gives me feedback, when Benjamin Brandt, when Todd Lester, Michael Henley, all these guys in our
Those
mastermind, when they
phenomenal
give
guys.
feedback, I am rapt attention taking notes. Now, usually it's followed by some kind of jab or joke, right? Which is how we do this. But yeah, somebody who's doing it better than me has advice. I want to hear every word of that.
Now, I'm going to be a little bit more nuanced with that, Jarvis,
Please.
if I may, because this doesn't get to a point where someone has to be better at everything in the practice
Mm-mm.
than me for me to get
Nope.
advice. For example, somebody brings on more prospects, if they bring on more AUM, if they have a better prospect process than I do, then perfect. I want to know about that, right? Maybe they're not to the level of success in taking time off or in processes or in function or in delegation that I am to yet. Okay, great. But you have cracked this code. Tell me more about this and how do I incorporate that into what I do? Super, super important.
Yeah, it does really spin. I think about our good friend Jamie Dawson in Colorado. That guy is so relaxed at his office. Like
Oh.
he doesn't seem like he ever gets stressed. And I'm sure Jamie has stressed out days, but he's so relaxed and calm all the time. Cool, Jamie. I want to understand how you stay that cool headed and that calm and that collected all the time. So yeah, I'm always learning from anybody I can.
I love it. All right, the second thing I'm going to add to this before we get on our nice little rant, Jarvis, is if you're thinking, "Oh, I never do that with a prospect," stop right there because you probably do.
I
And
do.
yeah, I was just gonna say I'm just as guilty, right? So these are things that I need to take back and say, when do I do this in a meeting? Because I guarantee I do some of this stuff in prospect meetings, and all it does is take away the value that the prospect is getting, all to inflate my own ego. That's what's happening in today, and I got to get better at checking that because I am committed to delivering massive value to my clients.
Yeah, yeah, and the topic we're going to talk about today, as we mentioned in the intro code, is stop talking the prospect out of the sale, or stop talking the client out of your recommendation. Right? We're going to use those terms interchangeably here. And Mike, I think it is one half ego. Like what I have to say is so important. I think another part of it, and please push back on this, is we get
Yeah.
nervous. We think maybe they don't understand. Maybe I haven't convinced them, so I'm going to keep talking. Where maybe 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, if you stop, if you sit back and if you're quiet, you say, tell me your thoughts about this. Tell me what's on your mind about this. And then I'm quiet and I wait. My experience, like a
Jarvis, I
nine
love
times
that.
out of 10, that makes all the difference.
Jarvis, what I love about that comment, right, is because sometimes we feel, and we're going to blame compliance, right, whatever compliance is in your world, that says, oh, well, I have to disclose this. Oh, I have to talk about this. I have to do this. Look, we're not talking about not disclosing things. We're talking about effective communication with clients, which means they understand what they're doing and how this is a better recommendation for them. That's what we're talking about. But you got to, Jarvis, I just love that. You got to hit that pause button in the conversation and get off of your spiel and step back. Let's start getting some feedback for the client. Let's start understanding, what do they know about this? How does it work for them? Why do they like it? Why do they not like it? We got to get that feedback to make sure what we're saying is being heard.
Yeah, and you could be, we've talked about this on the episode, you could be totally in the wrong direction. You might think the question or the issue is X Roth conversions, where the real one might be, hey, I'm worried that my adult son's going to blow this money when he inherits it. And so you've missed the real one. So, Micah, some specifics. I always walk into every prospect meeting, every client meeting, even meetings, Micah, where I'm scheduled to coach an advisor or I'm scheduled to talk to a vendor. I love leading with, hey, I've got a couple things I want to go over today, but please let's start with the questions and concerns that are on yours. That I've even had people push back and they're like, well, you scheduled this to ask me about X, Y, and Z. Yep. But I just want to make sure if there's any questions or concerns on your mind that we get those out to begin with. Same with, go ahead, please, Micah.
I just want to pull some stuff out of
Yeah,
there, right? Because
please,
it's
please.
just solid gold. What I love about that is Jarvis articulated that he had an agenda, right? I
Mhm.
have some things that I want to cover with you, but before we get to that, what are your questions? So even when you get those people that are pushing back on you, it says it was great. It's not like you showed up without an agenda, which pisses me off, by the way.
Yes.
If somebody scheduled a meeting with me and they showed up without an agenda, then I'm like, why are we wasting my time, right? You reached out to me for this. So I think it's highly important to be a professional, to come with an agenda of things to cover. But again, if I have a pressing issue on my mind and another professional has an agenda, boy, I really don't care about their agenda because I have this burning question and I can't stop thinking about this burning question until we get to this other, and until we answer that. Now I can move on to your other agenda. That's the value of asking this question up front.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, an example of that, Mike, I met with a prospect this week who's becoming a client, and we had created our one page financial plan, and we had a lot of things to go over. Alex had done a great job creating this, but I asked that question, and the wife says, actually, Matthew, the number one question in my mind is we want to buy a house outside of the country, and I'm just really not sure how to do that. I said, perfect, great news. And I physically slid the agenda aside. Let's set this aside for just a minute. We'll get back to this. Let's talk about this. Tell me more about what it is you want to do. Tell me why this is your goal. And we walked through that. And just that gesture, Mike, and I know you do this, of slide to the
I
side and
love
say,
it.
hey,
Love it.
what's on your mind is number one, because that is number one. And at the end of the meeting, we went through a lot of different stuff. The reason they became clients, they even vocalized, they said, no one gave us this clear guidance on buying a house out of the country. We want to work with you. They didn't say, Jarvis,
Perfect.
your Roth conversion techniques were amazing. They were amazing. They didn't say, your one page financial plan. It was. They said, hey, the fact that you took time and talked about what was top on our mind, that's why we want to work with you. Perfect.
And we've all had these experiences, right? I mean, you could go back through and you could think about that with a lot of your own clients in your mind and say, great, one of our mantras in TPR is do what works. So if you had that success in the past by doing this, great, keep doing that going forward. Don't reinvent the wheel and come up with a new way of doing this. Getting to that prospect's questions, that's the core essence here and value. And you know what? In those cases, maybe it is about buying a house overseas, or maybe they just want to visit and travel, right? Maybe it doesn't make sense, but allowing them to articulate it and going through that conversation, that is massive value. I love it.
Yeah. Part of this, Micah, is well, and again, guys like you and I, people that at the top of the industry study psychology, we study how the human mind works.
Mm,
People want to be heard. And that's never been the case more than it is today. We're just bombarded with information. We're bombarded with noise coming out of us. So for you to be the person to stop, to listen, to say, tell me what's on your mind, the relationship that you're building is off the charts. By the way, that relationship, I know your technical expertise is off the charts, but that relationship is ultimately why people are hiring you versus Vanguard. They really don't understand that your technical knowledge is 10x Vanguard. They don't really get that. I'm just no disrespect, but that you listen
mm.
and then you can say, all right, your issue is this. Here is the solution. That's what wins.
Ooh, Jarvis, I'm gonna be a little edgy. Your
Please.
technical knowledge is worthless.
Mm,
How's that? It is worthless compared to every other advisor because clients cannot distinguish
they
between them.
don't know.
So, yeah. So, I'm not saying you don't have to have technical knowledge. I'm just saying in the prospect's mind, it's completely worthless because the reason they're in your door is they assume you already have some level of technical knowledge. Now it's about communication skills, right? You've already crossed that initial threshold. Now it's all about communication skills and how effective you can you deliver that technical knowledge and basic communication to the client. So all of these massive designations, all of these these things that you have, lack of ability to articulate in basic terms to clients, boy, that's the make and break right there.
Micah, a good litmus test for this. This comes from a coach, John Barron, that we've worked with for a lot of years. Great guy. He always talks about, is this like saying you have electricity at your office? So if you are saying the same thing that every other advisor says, I operate with integrity, I have X number of years of experience,
I'm a
I'm a CFP, I'm
fiduciary.
a fiduciary. That doesn't matter because nobody's going through and saying, hey, you know what? I have no experience. I'm going to rip you off. So if you're spending time and capital telling them things that everyone else is telling them, you're missing it right there.
One of the things I love to do, Jarvis, is that when a client comes, excuse me, a prospect comes in, and sometimes prospects will come in with a list of questions to ask financial advisors, right? And they'll
Oh,
have
sure.
that list that's going to be there, and it's going to be like, great, are you a fiduciary, right? How
Uh-huh.
long have you been this? Are you a CFP, right? And I actually had one prospect come in and says, all right, he's looking at it, he's like, I'm supposed to ask you this, but I don't even know what it means. But okay, are you a fiduciary? Then I said, well, yes, I am. And we were actually a fiduciary before it was cool. And he's like, great.
Right.
No idea what it means. All right. So, he just felt like he needed to
True.
check off a box. Now, I could have sat there and explained to him what a fiduciary was, but how would that help him accomplish his goals? I answered the question very briefly. Now I want to pivot directly into his retirement goals. Great. He had some complex things going on in his federal benefits. I wanted to pivot to that and say, great, how do we add value in this meeting that's right here? This is an example of where an advisor could easily slip into overselling, right? The client could say, well, I don't really know what a fiduciary is. Oh, great. Let me explain what a fiduciary is. And I can go on 5 or 10 minutes what a fiduciary means, but what value does that have to a client? Now, those advisors that are listening, they're holding yourselves out only as fiduciaries and think that's the only reason people should work with you. You're probably pretty pissed right now because it's worthless. Yes, you should be check those compliance box. I'm not saying that, but just that fact alone does not help the client. Most of us across the board are fiduciaries in what we do. So already based on that, I have electricity in my office. You don't get to hire me because I have electricity. You have to add value.
100%, Micah. And real quick, that prospect that you mentioned that didn't know fiduciary, this wasn't like a 17-year-old kid that was doing college planning or something. Like
He's
this
an
is a
electrical engineer.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, top of his field, doing phenomenal things. Army Corps of Engineers. I mean, he's doing some great stuff inside of there. Been out there a long time. Highly educated. Yes, but guess what? Highly educated in engineering
Yes.
and electrical engineering, right? Not finance.
Mhm. We could side tangent on that. I was talking this week with a client, very well-to-do client. He's selling his professional practice, and so I said, "Hey, just a couple of things you're going to want to think about." And I just very short snippets. I didn't, bust out the sell agreement. It's a couple of things. We're going to watch for clawback provisions. Watch how they adjust your EBITDA. And he says, "Oh, I never even thought to ask those things." And I said, "But Michael, here this is the thing." I said, "You know what? If we were talking about anything medical, he's a medical professional. You would lose me, Dave. You would lose me immediately. This is what I do, and
Yep.
I'm really good at." So again, I'm going to compliment him. I don't. This is the other part of it. I don't ever want a client to feel like they're the dummy in the room. They're not. They're a professional at what they do. I'm a professional at what I do. We are peers in life. It's just we have different areas of expertise.
Jarvis, we also got to keep in mind when we're talking about those things, the client's ego and the sensitivity is this as well, right? Especially husband and wife. Guys
Yes.
don't like to be embarrassed, especially in front of their wives. So if you're saying something in that nature and making one of the spouses, especially the guy, feel incompetent about something, they're going to get defensive and dismissive, saying, oh, yeah, I understand that. Oh, yeah, I understand that. When they're mine, they have no clue what you're talking about. So it's
Yeah.
really another reason we have to step back in our language. We're talking with another, it's actually as a new client that was coming on, and they have a family partnership
Hmm.
for the family, yeah, a limited liability partnership between their sisters, and it's a farm and all these things. So we get chatting about it a little bit, and I just asked the question. I said, "Sorry, so you know, I have to ask this question, but God forbid if something happens to one of your sisters,
Hmm.
what takes place with the farm?" Right. And we get talking about that a little bit. I said, what if something happens to you? What takes place with the farm? And so I'm starting to ask these questions. We're starting to probe through. And I said, okay, this is something that we might want to put in place. It's like a buy sell agreement. We might want to put something in place. And the husband sat back in his chair and he goes, huh, that's what the attorney was talking about. And the attorney had gone right into legalese years ago with them and saying, these are these documents you need to put in place.
Hmm.
And they're like, yeah, yeah, whatever. And they've never done anything because they didn't put it in correlation to the client, right? So this would be an example of talking yourself out of the sale. If you're jumping right into technical terms that this isn't the client's wheelhouse, but we live in it every day. So we think it's so simple, like a buy sell agreement, right? We look at it and say, it's not that complex. A trust, not that complex in the concept of it, right? This is brand new things to clients. We really got to explain it and how it relates to them.
Boy, I love that, Micah. You know, another thing that comes to mind, this is pivoting just a little bit. I'm currently listening to Matthew McConaughey, the actor, his
Yeah.
memoir, Green Lights. He has the most phenomenal reading voice. I don't even half the time I don't even know what he's talking about. I'm like hypnotized and mesmerized by his voice. He's just got such a great voice. But think about that from an audiobook standpoint, right? If would you rather listen to Matthew McConaughey doing his voices or somebody droning in monotone? Same thing when you ask those questions. And Mike, I know we go quick on this podcast, but those questions are asked with sincere curiosity. Hey,
Yes.
help me understand what your strategy is for Social Security. Help me understand what happens if one of your siblings passes away. This is a genuinely curious question. I'm not baiting them. I'm not belittling like, oh, Mike, tell me what your strategy is for Social Security, you big dummy. That
Right.
that comes across to people
Oh,
if
you
that's
don't
the
have a
approach.
strategy? Huh.
Uh-huh. That's
Amateur.
why you have to
Right.
hire me, right?
Right.
As soon as I feel like you're baiting me with your questions, I'm
Ooh.
done. I'm done.
Done. All right, Jarvis, a couple other things that I want to transition some action
Please.
items, if that's all right. One of the things I definitely want to talk about is inside of our prospect meetings, know when to have follow up emails, know when to have phone calls and meetings, right? Because
Mm,
this sometimes comes in. Sometimes we have that prospect meeting, the prospect comes back with extra questions. And this could be an explanation that they ask a simple question. We think we know what they're talking about. And so we go in this diatribe in this email and send off this long email response. And it wasn't even their stinking question,
yep,
right? So a lot of times I will not answer follow up questions from prospects if it's outside of a meeting. Why?
yep.
I don't know them yet. I don't know what this context is going to be, right? And also, it becomes a price out of place because inevitably, if you're going back and forth in email, they'll bring the price back up and the price will be up in a separate communication than the value that you provided. Price out of place kills the deal, right?
Oh,
And just because you sent them a previous email, that does not add value. And that email that you're talking about price, that has to add value. In my world, I'm going to compress that into a meeting because in that meeting, I can add massive value in this time. So be careful in your prospecting process about how much you're going to engage in that, right? If it's a simple follow up question saying, hey, Micah had a question about what beneficiary form I should fill out. Sure, the RMs will handle that and make sure they answer that question. Micah, how should I do A, B, and C? That's a follow up meeting that you should chat with Micah about.
boy, Mike, that even goes. This whole rant on this. The prospect I met with this last week, I said, and I say this to every prospect at the end. Listen, when you get home, you're going to have more questions, Micah, that you didn't think to ask me during this meeting.
Mhm.
Great news. We've been in business for 30 years. We're not in a rush for you to make a decision. What I want you to do is when you have those questions, call in. We'll schedule another time for us to talk because I'm in
Perfect.
no rush for you to make a decision. I want to make sure all your questions are answered and they're best answered when we can sit down and look each other across the table, eyeball to eyeball. So I'm setting that
Love
stage
it.
similar to your thing
Love
and
it.
I'm saying what your questions are important to me. I didn't say, you know what, Micah, you need to come back in so I can read you 4 more pages of one-page financial plan. So we can go over page 83 of Money Guide Pro. Micah, you're going to have questions, and I want to make sure I can answer those questions.
I love it. All right, Jarvis, let's transition to some action items. This is a quick pod, but we just had a little bit of time. We're going to pound one out for you guys. So, action items. First thing that I'm going to say before speaking, are you speaking to hear yourself speak, or are you answering a direct question from the prospect or client? Then, after that, you got to hit the pause button and ask a follow up question to make sure that information was understood.
I love that. Action item number 2, keep asking questions of people you want to learn from. An opportunity to do that. Micah and I, along with Stephen Jarvis from Retirement Tax Service and Benjamin Brandt, our dear friend and podcast extraordinaire, we are doing a panel of success, which will be an all-day Q&A type format at XYPN Live. You can visit theperfectra.com to sign up for that or visit XYPN Live and click on the pre-conferences. That's going to be in October in Denver, excuse me, not Dallas, Denver.
Denver.
It's going
Yeah.
to be a lot of fun, Micah.
Oh, it's going to be a blast. Yeah, make sure you're signed up for that. We're excited. We're going to be at the conference. It's just going to be an absolute riot. Other thing, measure what matters, right? So you
Mhm.
need to keep a tally in your office. This would be a great thing for you to do, is keep a tally. How many questions are you asking versus how many answers are you giving? I put that on the homework sheet, right column, left column, and just their little tallies inside of there. And now I know at the end of the meeting, it says, holy crap, I didn't ask enough questions, right? How come there's only 2 tallies for questions, but I opened my mouth a lot during that meeting because my ego could easily get in the way, Jarvis, and I can look backwards and say, oh my gosh, I was amazing during this meeting. I gave them so much great information, right? Because that can easily happen. I got to keep a tally of it. I got to measure it to make sure I'm delivering value and upping my game.
Yeah, not just easily happen. That's the default. The
Oh,
default is
totally.
we just as humans, our default is to talk and not listen. focus on the listening. Well, Micah, as always, this was an absolute pleasure. To our TPR Nation, the tens of thousands of advisors who listen to this podcast, thank you for being part of this. Be sure to give the podcast 5 stars, share it on your social media page so we can continue growing the audience, having fun doing things like XYPN Live. And Micah, until next time, happy planning.
Happy planning.